Welcome back, Bee Shifters. So glad to have you here for this episode. Today we're going to be hanging out with our own Nick Brunacini and Chief Terry Garrison. Terry was very instrumental in the beginning of command training at the Phoenix Fire Department. And from there, he went out to California, to the Oceanside Fire Department, came back to Arizona for a little bit, and then to the Houston, Texas Fire Department, where he was a part of some big changes amid some tragedy at that department. He then returned to Arizona to become the Glendale Fire Chief, and I have the distinct pleasure of writing a column with Chief Garrison called Ask the Chief in the Bee Shifter Quarterly, and his advice is always good advice. He's a guy I can listen to and pick up a ton of new information every time I listen to him. Today, it's going to be a little lighthearted. We're going to go back to the origins of command training, how both Nick and Terry first met, and some of the ups and downs of command training with the Phoenix Fire Department. These guys have seen a lot, done a lot, and managed to keep a sense of humor all the while they are putting Mrs. Smith first in the delivery of emergency services. Glad you're here today. Please enjoy this conversation with Terry Garrison and Nick Brunacini. I'm going to ask some questions that I'd like to know the answers to, and then you can omit things that if you don't want to omit it and stuff. But I'd really like to find out about when you two started working together.
Really, the first time I saw Garrison, I was probably 15 or 16 years old.
Okay.
And I was at Mr. Lucky's.
I knew we were going
And
there.
I was, it was a bar on the west side of Phoenix that a fireman who wasn't a fireman yet owned. And he had a bunch of firemen who were bouncers for him. So I went to high school with a guy who was a really kind of a mid-level criminal. And he worked at Mr. Lucky's in the snack bar. You know, we weren't old enough to be in there, but because we worked behind in the snack bar, we could be. So there was two levels to this place. There was the top floor was country and the bottom floor was rock. Well, we had the snack bar on the countryside. So my hooligan friend would take a hot dog and fully dress it, mustard, ketchup, relish, the whole thing, and they'd be dancing on the dance floor, and he'd just start throwing them out at the crowd. So I remember one day there was a bus stop one night. Everybody's fighting. Everything's out of control. And I see Garrison kind of standing there wearing his cowboy hat. And there were always a lot of females around him back in those days. So that was the first exposure I had to the B shift, if you will.
So, Nick, I never knew they had a snack bar there. I knew they had a bar, but I didn't know they had snacks.
Well, remember Mr. Lucky's Fish?
Oh,
That's where it came from.
Oh, yeah, okay.
See,
they had
then
the kitchen
Friday's
with the
probably, what?
Yeah.
At least 75% of the fire stations order fish from them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was firemen in there all day long getting fish on the Friday.
There's a saying in Texas, big hat, no cattle.
Mm-hmm.
That was definitely me. Yeah. I had a hat and cowboy boots, and you know, I had a dad that he never wore tennis shoes. He wore cowboy boots his whole life. I asked him one time, he either wore work boots, he's a construction guy who wore cowboy boots. And he didn't like sneakers. He thought they stank, which they did on teenage boys. So when I got older, it's like, well, I don't want to stink around girls. So I got me some cowboy boots. But I asked my dad once when he was young, I said, Dad, why don't you wear tennis shoes? And he's a big 300-pound guy, 6'6", and he looks over at me and goes, because I don't play tennis. From that point on. But so I wore cowboy boots, and that was my look, right? You had to have a look, and it worked out okay for me a few times.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Where'd you grow up, Terry?
West Phoenix, yeah, right in the Maryville area. My dad, like I said, my dad was a construction worker. Mom stayed at home. 2 brothers, 2 sisters, and me. So there's 5 kids. And you know, construction wasn't always that steady, but yeah, grew up in a little small 3-bedroom house, 5 kids and parents, and yeah, right there in Maryville that everybody talks about.
When did you get interested in the fire department?
I never really was. Honestly,
I hope that's changed.
Yeah, still not. Yeah.
To this day, I'm wondering.
I'm still job hunting.
To this day, I'm thinking the things will just go out if we leave them alone.
Mm-hmm.
But
You
no,
learned that after a time.
right. So I actually was in the Army. I joined the Army. I dropped out of high school. Dropped out of high school junior year because I got my girlfriend pregnant. What are you going to do about it? So I dropped out of high school and joined the Army when I was 17. I turned 17 on October 20th and went in the Army on October 31st in boot camp. So Halloween, I'm headed to on a bus to boot camp. So then when I got out of the Army after 2 years, that was back in the 2 years, that was 1974 to 76. You do 2 years. And then when I got out, I thought I would go, I was a helicopter crew chief in the Army. So I thought that I could go to the city and get a job working on helicopters. So I went to the personnel department and I said, yeah, I'm here to apply for a helicopter maintenance job. And she looked at me like, you're an idiot. We don't even have helicopters. So she goes, but there's a line for the fire department over there. This is last week that they're taking those, but you could try that. And I had my DD-214, so I said, oh, I guess I'll try that. So I stood in the line. And that's how I became a firefighter. I got hired.
How old were you then?
I was 19. And there was remember that? There was 5,000 applicants. I mean, people were applying but they had a deal called Project ROMP, recruitment of minority persons, where if you made a certain little amount of money and lived in a certain area, you kind of go to the top of the list depending on how you score. And I was making that amount of money and living in that neighborhood. So I kind of got through a little bit of the door and then taking all the civil service exams in the Army. Kind of put me up. I think I got a 98 on the test. It was just a written test. And then it was 5 points for a veteran. So that got me to an interview. One interview, they felt sad for me. You're 19. You got a wife and 2 kids at the time. One of them passed away. You got 2 kids. And so, yeah, they hired me out of I think they felt bad for me. So I became a firefighter. And I didn't know anything didn't do any research or nothing. So here it is, I think 44 plus years. I'm thinking about staying. I don't know.
Does your fire department hire 19-year-olds?
Yeah, we hire not very often, right? But we do hire 19-year-olds still.
18.
Yeah.
That is the minimum age.
And you were 18 when you got hired, right, Nick?
20.
You were 20. How'd you get hired?
I was with a friend of mine who was going downtown to pick up an application, and he didn't say what for. He said, I'm going to get a job application. We were out running around. He was driving, so I followed him into the building, and I'm standing next to him. He asked for a fire department app, and the gal comes back and she gave me one too. And oh, what the hell? So I had 2 or 3 jobs at the time, and I thought, well, this one pays better, and it appears that nurses, as Chief Garrison pointed out earlier, are more attracted to this occupation. Well, although I was a bartender, so you could do things with that. But anyway, so that was it. I filled out the application, and I got hired about a year later. My buddy didn't. He flunked the test. Yeah. Yeah, see,
That's good.
so that's kind of where it started for me. It was a big surprise. When my dad found out, he kind of fell over.
Really?
You're what? Yeah, I mean, it still has that pension thing, right?
And he never tried recruiting you or never said, this would be a good job for you?
No, he used to tell a story. He says, when your kids are growing up, you want them to be successful. And then, when they get a little older, you want them to graduate from college and become senators. And he says, when my kids hit about 16, 17, 18 years old, he says, I just wanted them not to go to jail and live.
Right.
Because that's kind of, yeah.
That you've been an overachiever.
Exactly. So it's, and it was good. The fire department probably saved our life. I mean, if you think about it.
And you guys got hired in the early 80s then, right?
I was hired in 1977 in the fire department.
1980. Yeah,
okay.
For me.
Yeah.
Oh, different times. What?
I guess.
Yeah.
That's what they keep telling me. Yeah.
It was different times. So, we just went, just a little kind of sideboard deal. You probably don't want to go there. But so we just went through this, the Black Lives Matter and the cops and the protests and the election and everything. So I called an old buddy of mine who was, because I'm trying to figure out how to manage this through the fire department. People, try to keep people neutral as much as possible at work. And so I asked this old fire captain, Captain Ted Ondercheck. You know Ted. Ted's 82 years old.
Speedo Ted.
And he could come in here and beat us all to death. He's an amazing man. He's 82 and he's wears a size 16.
Call Katie right now. Will be our only salvation.
Size 16 shoe, and he's incredible. His fingers, I don't want to talk about. But anyway, I called him up. I said, Ted, how did you handle, because he was around the fire department when we had Vietnam and some of those kind of protests and stuff. And I said, how did you handle the diversity in the fire station? How'd that look like? He goes, Terry. He goes, you don't get it. He goes, when I was in the fire department during those times, he says, the only thing we argued about, he goes, is all white guys. And the only thing we argued about is whether you fish trout or bass. He said that was a big discussion of diversity in the fire department back then. I said, okay, well, that's not very helpful. Thanks. I don't fish. But so look at what we go through now.
Well,
but you talk about times being different, right?
Very different. I mean, so I got hired in 1990 as a part-time firefighter, and there was no discussion around the kitchen table about politics,
right.
About, the issues that people are talking about right now. And I think the fire service is probably very reflective of society, right?
Right.
I mean, these are things that everybody's going through right now, but Chief Garrison put out, I thought, an awesome letter to your people.
Oh.
And it was just telling them to downshift a little bit, right?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I had heard there was discussions, and nobody was wearing MAGA hats or anything at work, or Joe sunglasses, but people were sharing their opinions. And I guess you'd walk in one fire station, it'd be Fox News, and you walk in another, and it's CNN. It's like, oh God, and it really was COVID, so I couldn't get to all the stations. That wouldn't have worked anyway. So I tried to get out a memo to just basically what I told them was that, hey, you guys would risk. If you had a fire right now and the guy sitting across the table that you disagreed with on whatever topic it is, and you had 20% left in your air bottle, he or she had a mayday, you would rush back in, risk your life. We would have to put somebody at the door to stop you from saving your fellow firefighter. I said, so you care about each other that much. Why would you get in an argument over something that doesn't matter anyway? It's at the national level. Don't let that filter down into the fire stations. So what I learned in Houston, Texas is what other people feel about you is none of their business. And I said, just carry that on to your politics. What other people care, what you feel about your politics, nobody cares. So we made it through, and it didn't seem like a whole lot occurred there. It seemed like everything, and I don't know if it was a memo or not. It might just be the way people in Glendale decided to feel about each other. But they're good people there. But it is scary.
We did something similar because I ripped it off from you, but I actually, and this was just on vaccines. I was encouraging people to get vaccines, and I had somebody who was on the other side of the vaccine issue, and she took offense to that.
Right.
She thought I was being too emotional, and why would I encourage people to get these vicious vaccines that, we don't know what's going to happen. And,
an employer can cause an employee to have a vaccine. That's so, like a private company can say, no, you're not coming back to work here unless you have your vaccine. So it's kind of odd that they're turning it around almost. Like, how dare you?
Yeah. But Nick and I talk about this once in a while. The amount of firefighters that hate the government and they don't realize they work for the government.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's
kind of odd.
Yeah. I mean, and by far, I think we're probably the best as far as delivering service goes in the government.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But probably so much so they forget that that's actually what we do.
Oh, no, that's me.
You're supposed to, right?
Right.
It's just part of the deal.
But we were socially active in 1985 because I worked downtown at Station 1. And Ladder 1 was in a American LaFrance Century apparatus. So it had the floating rear end, just a junk aerial truck. So the captain there was always micromanaging his crew, and they never could do anything right. You have to show them. So Woolsey's doing his
I know
deal.
who he is before he said it.
Yeah, exactly. So he's going to drive the truck to the academy. They got training that day to show them the proper use of and how you drive a ladder like that. Well, he's pulling out of the bay, and he cuts it too sharp, and the floating axle floats, and the outrigger catches the side of the door, the frame. And we were upstairs, and it sounded like a bomb went off. I mean, literally, it was. We went to slide the poles, but you thought, well, I don't know if I want to go down there. Right. When we look out the window, and there's ladder one, and half the front of the station's on top of it. So they ended up boarding it up, and they were so pissed off about it, buildings and grounds. They said, we're not going to fix the door. You just have to run out the back. So for at least 6 months, the front of the station was boarded up. Well, somebody spray painted a bullseye on the front and wrote Woolsey's name and an arrow down. So somebody complained, said you can't put graffiti on it. So we painted it over. And then I think it was Libya had shot at one of our jets or something. So we tagged it, Gaddafi must die today. Oh. So we started putting political advertisements on the front of it. And it got fixed within about 2 weeks.
Yeah, if you're not going to fix it, well,
they said, if you're going to, we'd rather have a door than a billboard in front of this particular fire station. So,
they're very active.
It was good.
Well, it's better than putting up a sheet and showing movies, right?
Yeah, well, that's what. Yeah, we're always going to do.
You know, Nick. So we worked together as captains too, though, but not a lot. But when we worked together as I was actually John's captain for about maybe a year and a half, and only saw him for one shift on at the station because of PFN, right? And then you went, and then I promoted, and then I followed you. But I was originally sent there. I got that station. I wasn't sent there. I got lucky enough to go to Station 11. We had the best firehouse in the city. It was right next to the county hospital, and they would do all the trauma. They would open people's chests, and it was a teaching emergency room, and you get all it's a county hospital, right? And then behind us was the what would you call where the poor sad?
The hospital for the mentally insane.
Yeah, that's a nice
and
way
prison.
Of saying it. Yeah. And that they were the prison. Like if you killed like more than 7 people, you went there type thing because you were criminally insane. So we had that, and then we had hookers that would troll in front of the station. And they weren't expensive, but I didn't go there.
We used to give them gloves.
No,
Don't you get more than one use out of this one?
We were nice.
You paramedics so nice.
And but it was a great area. It was a great area if you're a paramedic because all your patients would go to the county hospital, and seriously, you could walk to the station. It was like across the parking lot, so you get back in service really fast instead of those long drives from hospitals. But it was a great place, and then we had a lot of fires down there because it's a lower economic area. Did I say that correctly? And there was a lot of buildings that were burning. Residentials and little commercial buildings, mom and pop kind of places now that they would make into cool restaurants and serve tacos with funny names and things like that. But
well, there was an engine, a ladder, and an ambulance. And
yeah,
there are 10 years, and every year it ran at least 10,000 runs out of the station. So it was very busy.
And one time, so this is how much Nick actually liked me. So we had an ambulance. We called them rescues because that was nicer than ambulance. And people with low seniority would be assigned to these, but they wanted to be at a permanent station. So you get assigned. So we had a couple guys assigned to our rescue on B shift when I first got there. And they bitched so much about going on the rescue calls or the ambulance calls that I said, hey, let's each take, like if we each take a shift, maybe once, I don't even know what it was, once a quarter, whatever, just to give them a break off that so they could get on a real fire engine or a ladder company. And people thought I was insane. And I said, I'll do it too, until Nick said, no, I'll do that. And Nick actually was willing to do that. And that was pretty crazy. Do you remember that?
Yeah, but I mean, how
It
hard could
didn't
it be?
help their attitude. In
No,
it.
they were always
They didn't
whining
last
about
on. They were
something,
they were nice guys, but they just.
Well, and we got into the ambo business kind of sideways. Nobody ever meant to. No. And the problem was, back in the day, there were about a dozen ambo companies in the city. And they make their money doing interfacility transports. Emergency transport was less than 5% of their business. Well, they could never come up with any kind of a rotation that was equitable for all the companies. So they said, what we're going to do is just a round robin. So you start with Ambo Company A, then you go to Ambo Company B, then C, then boom, boom, boom. Well, they're not all over the city like the fire department. So Ambo A is on the east side. Well, I'm on the west side, and you're working a code. Well, Ambo A's coming. So you would do CPR for 30 minutes. You're like, well, this is ridiculous. So it became a bigger and a bigger problem. Well, the fire department, the fire chief and the union president met with the city and all the AMBO, the people who run the AMBO companies. We need to do this. So they're going back and forth, and the city's, we need to consider, business and the effect of the government and all the rest of it. I remember my old man said, just a minute. He says, we're the wrong ones making the decision on this. He says, we need to interview the person who needs the AMBO next, because they have to wait 30 minutes because you assholes can't make up your mind who's going to make the extra 5%. He says it's ridiculous. So politically, the union president had the power to take the AMBO service over, and he did. So that we ended up with the AMBOs. Well, the deal was they weren't going to charge the public for a ride. They said, no, we won't charge. We'll charge your insurance company, and if you can't pay, we'll just throw it right in the garbage. And then so we started the AMBOs. Well, we bought like 20 ambulances, and now it's like, well, who's going to be on them? Well, it's all seniority based. It's so bad.
Anybody, not me.
Yeah. Well, and our experience with them is you would go on an EMS call, and you would look at it, it'd be difficulty breathing, roll the AMBO. We call for an AMBO that fast because they took so long to get.
Right.
So...
But that system's a lot different than a lot of areas. And I know when you tried to institute that in Houston, Terry, it was they weren't used to what the Phoenix system was, where you actually request the AMBO once you do the assessment, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a different system.
Well, yeah, Houston, they had a lot of ambulances, right? And if you became a firefighter in Houston, you spent your first 5 or 6, 7 years on an ambulance before you made it onto a fire engine. And they were firefighters, and but they were kind of like, oh man, it's kind of like when they were like the invisible firefighters, like, hey, they're going to take care of it. So they didn't, most fire companies, I don't know if I say most, but it's pretty common that the firefighters wouldn't do they get an EMS call and they would just stand over the patient and wait for the ambulance to get on the scene and then evaluate and do everything. And ladders didn't go on EMS calls. So, when I changed that, you can imagine how popular I was around ladder guys. Although it was kind of interesting. A lot of them said, yeah, we needed to do this, Chief. That's what they said to my face. They were nice people. But I remember one call. So we changed this model, and we had a girl. This is why I remember it mostly, is we had a girl that was at one of the further away fire stations from, 600 square miles, Houston. And a girl got backed over by her parents in a driveway. And I think it might have even been the mom that backed her over. And the firefighters that arrived on the scene, apparently, from what I heard, told her, hey, you know what? Your daughter would be at the hospital right now if that fire chief went and instituted this fire engine response model. And that wasn't true, because what had happened is they got there sooner. We dispatched the ambulance at the same time. We just dispatched the engine with it. And they spent their time. And to be fair, there was probably somebody on the crew that was treating a child, but one of them was bad-mouthing me the whole time. It's like, really, that's not what it's supposed to do. So if they would have evaluated, packaged, got the child ready, then the ambulance would have arrived. It would have all been much quicker. So I was able to explain that to the mayor and the city council, and it's like, okay, Chief, because it got pretty hostile about that. I was like, okay, this is the one where you're going to get in a jam. It's like, no, you guys aren't understanding it correctly. We didn't just not dispatch the ambulance. They were still the same distance away. We added the engine on the front end that could have created the treatment earlier or started the treatment earlier. So that was kind of goofy. But, once they started going on the calls and even the ladders, I think they've realized it all made sense there. Oh. And, I think I'm going to say this, I'm kind of an optimist, but I think once the firefighters figured out it's the right thing to do, I think they all get on board. And I just don't think they had thought that before.
Just change.
Yeah. And if you're a ladder, do you want to go on any, does anybody want to go on any difficulty breathing calls or ill people? But that's part of the job, right?
It is part of the job. And you get guys who get assigned to those. I had guys who were assigned to ladders or had some technical rescue equipment, and they think then that's their job. Like they're not going to do anything else. Like, well, I'm not a nurse, or whatever. And it's like, well, this isn't 1975 either. Yeah. We're in a different time. So
yeah.
Best customer service, right? I mean, it's like whatever we can do to provide the best service is what we should do. And if that's sending an engine or a ladder or...
Well, once they realized that, the Houston people, once they realized that that's the way it's going to be, they jumped on board right away. And it changed. I mean, you think about a big ship changing slowly. Nah, they were right on it. And it happened pretty quick. And I'm thinking they're still doing it. I don't think Pena has done anything different. But, it didn't take them long to get on board. But
it's the best thing. The fire department delivers the highest level of service for EMS. I mean, we just do. So given the choice between the fire department running the ambos or a private company, I would always take the other.
Yeah.
The other thing that advantage to it, and we used to tell the people on the ambos is, hey man, if you work for a private ambo company, you'd be making a third of the money. You'd be working more. You wouldn't have the same benefits that you do. See, and that was really kind of the most telling thing for me, is I thought all these dozen ambulance companies are fighting over these crumbs. We took this service over. We paid everybody that worked on them a living wage. We didn't gouge the customer, and we still made a profit at the end of the year off the ambos. They brought in more than it went out. And you think this is kind of the way it's supposed to look. Well, no, the private business. Well, yeah, they make a third of the money. So, and the fire department, I think, is a more responsible employer, if you will. I mean, there's things that we do that are a little higher level than...
And owning the patient care from the dispatch all the way to the delivery at the hospital is pretty important.
Yeah.
We do that better than anybody.
Exactly.
Now we have a private ambulance company in Glendale Fire Department right now. We haven't moved forward with our CON, our city manager's not quite supportive of it yet. I'm sure he'll get on board someday. But we're pretty fortunate. We have a pretty good ambulance company that's run by a former firefighter, so he kind of gets it. And so we have a good model. But back then it was, you remember Ted when he was on ambulance?
Oh, Ted Wynn?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He was the most interesting guy in the plane. Finally, he became a firefighter and a great firefighter, but he was in an ambulance. It was like one of those movies. Remember the early movies with the ambulances arriving? And it's like, it was like, oh my gosh.
Ted was the first person to tell me, one is too many and 1,000 is not enough.
Yeah.
He was a lunatic. And he was always dealing with issues of some kind or another.
But when we hired him, we got ourselves a firefighter. He loved, I mean, think about it. He was an ambulance jockey back when they were probably called that. And man, he would get right in there on an ambulance. He was a trauma guy.
He was. Wasn't he a paramedic in the military at some point?
He had all kinds of unique experience. We probably shouldn't be talking to a guy. You could probably take his name out of here when you do it, because I think he's still around. But he was one of the guys. We didn't get a lot of people. The reason I brought that up, so we didn't get a lot of people that transitioned well from ambulance to firefighter. And even it's interesting when people want to become paramedics. we assume they all want to be firefighters. So there was a point in Houston where we needed paramedics. In fact, what we were doing in Houston, we were forcing an entire class. If you were in this group of 30, and we hired like 300 while I was there, if you're this group of 30 in this class, you are all going to medic schools. You have no choice. Well, how you think they did? What was there? But so it's like, let's hire some paramedics. The mayor at the time, let's hire paramedics. I said, I'd like to put that out. So we put out let's hire paramedics only. We had 29 candidates in the entire state of Texas. Actually, it was a national recruitment. And how about that? Wow. So we don't get a lot of people that want to go. Maybe now there may be a little bit more of it, but back then they didn't transition into the fire department. Do you know anybody else who did that? Who other than Ted? That's kind of why we remember him, because he was there, and then he was kind of on our team. But I don't remember anybody else that was a ambulance jockey that transferred over.
No, we had guys that when we took the ambos over, there were some older firefighters that took ambo spots.
Yeah,
and they did permanent spots for a long time.
Yeah.
Like the whole last 5 years of their career, they worked on an ambo.
Oh yeah, Paul did, didn't he?
Rudy. There was a couple of them. But you thought, well,
they were kind of. They had their, I think they kind of realized that the first, 3 to 5 minutes on a working fire is kind of fun, and then after that, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Yeah.
But there were guys who were really good at being a medic and good at working in the ambulance and great bedside manner and great skills, and that's who you want, right?
Well, and we didn't dump on the ambos so much because we did all the treatment. So we would always get there and treat the patient. So it wasn't like the Houston deal where like the ladder would show up and wait for the ambo to come. No. Our system evolved different. But our deal was to quick call for an ambo because it took so long to get. So we were constantly. Busy, yeah. Oh, and I mean, like the first 6 months, they started to get some PTSD. So hey, we need to quit, blah, blah, blah. And so you kind of soften it because they work for the same organization. Hell, they're in the fire station with you, hyperventilating 3 or 4 times a day. I don't want to be here. Well, you could work for the private one down the street.
I remember going into admin at the time, and as a young guy, I didn't go into admin a lot. And there was maybe when we started, there was maybe 3 or 4 young ladies that were collecting for the ambo. And a year later, you go in there and there's an entire floor of people collecting ambulance fees, right?
Yeah. When they figured that out, they said if you will bill a patient within 72 hours or something, you will increase your collection rate by like 50%. So Phoenix, when we turned it over to an ambo company to collect for us, is we had over an 80% collection rate, which was unheard of at the time.
And when you say you're the fire department collecting, they seem more likely to pay rather than you're the ambulance for whatever reason.
When I was running ambulance collections, I'd have some people overpay because they wanted the fire department to have the extra money. So once in a while, I'd get like, well, this ambulance ride wasn't $800. It's like, no, it's $200 for buy the guy steaks or something. It's like,
that's on me.
Private companies are not getting that. And when you guys are talking about private companies, we had one that was like Mother Jugs and Speed.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, everyone's drunk driving the ambulance. And one, we had a patient get CO poisoning from being in the back of the ambulance. It had some kind of linoleum tile out of a kitchen that they had holes in it because it's the Midwest and things rust and everything. And it was pathetic. It's like, well, now we have to retreat the patient and put him in another ambulance because you're making him sicker.
Got a new problem.
Yeah. Don't do no further harm, right?
They probably become immune to that.
But there were some places that we would go to do blue card stuff. And you're talking to their training staff and officers that deliver that kind of content. And that was one of the things that they would bring up. They said, the problem we have is our new officers don't have any firefighting experience. And you ask them, well, why don't they? And they said, well, because they've worked the last 10 years on an ambo. And their only way off is they promote off of it onto an engine company as an officer.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and that's just the state of affairs in hell, most of the fire service probably runs AMPOs today.
Yeah, so it just kind of along those lines. So a wonderful, wonderful gentleman, Daniel Groover. I didn't get to know him. I just know he's wonderful based on talking to his wife in Houston. Had 21 years on, and it was all on an ambulance. He was one of those guys who was so good at paramedic treatment, and just that's what he loved to do. And so he stayed most of his career on an ambulance, and then went to a fire. He was getting ready to retire, went to an area called Kingwood, which is kind of out in the outskirts, to retire. Got him a great crew, and they were going to take care of him. Well, we dropped the ball because he ended up being out there as a firefighter with no additional training. So he had he died. His a line of duty death at a house fire, and we didn't train him the way we should have. So we implemented a system right after that. I left not long after that. That was my last line of duty death there. But and Ellie Groover knew it, his wife, and I talked to her many times, still talk to her every year, and she's like, hey, and that's one thing you always hear from the family members that are left. It's like, hey, my husband or daughter, in one case, love what they do, and they died in a fire doing their job, and they wouldn't want to do any other job. But you need to learn from this. And Ellie's the one that I remember the most. Is she would say, Chief, you make me a promise. I remember sitting on her couch. You make me a promise. You learn from this. So that's not good. What Nick was talking about, and it happens out there. You can do that, but you need to develop some internal training process for them. And so we ended up in Houston. If you were off for a certain period of time, a few months, you went back to the academy and got checked out before you went back on. We got really serious about it, and we're doing it here in Glendale too. But so he went 21 years, ends up at a retirement company with a bunch of guys he really liked who just happened to be off that day. New firefighters coming in, don't really understand his capabilities. They go to a house fire, he gets lost, runs out of air, and actually he had some air left in his bottles, but he did that deal where you don't turn the bottle all the way on, about 500 psi, it kind of equalizes. But that was a lesson for me. You gotta credential people, is the term we used, if they've been off the truck for a long period of time.
Well, and backing up I'm glad you brought this up. Line of duty deaths, you've dealt with them.
Yeah.
What advice would you give us to prevent them, and how to deal with them, because it's something that keeps us up at night.
So what we did after the Southwest Freeway fire is it's sad because organizationally everybody gets on board after a line of duty death, and you look for common solutions. And it's too bad we don't do that before. You're like, hey, let's try to figure out better how to prevent them. And I don't think any department, and we all say we do, but I don't think we do a good enough job. And, even when we first had Brett Tarver, we tried to fix it with tools. Remember that? One of the first recovery things is we need more air in our bottles and better rescue tools. Well, that's bullshit. So what we found out, and in Houston, is right away I said, okay, I've seen this before. And it worked through a process, so it wasn't my idea. It was a bunch of people working. We had a committed organization. Houston Fire Department was tired of losing people. So what we did is we tried, what I saw was there was three fixes, really. We implemented three things. First of all, the strategic level, which is blue card. And I'm not saying it because I'm on this. That was what we did. They were committed to blue card, and to this day, they're still doing blue card, and they're not going to, I don't see them moving away from that. And I think we were lucky enough to get a grant for almost $500,000 to move forward. The blue card, the second piece was Fireground Survival, which is a great program through the IAFF that we got everybody through that piece. And then the third piece at the time was the fire dynamics. It was the F-Star at the time. Dan Mikowski and his group came out, Kerber, and talked to our chief officers. We have, a couple hundred chief officers. So when you think about it, you got 92 2 fire stations at the time. I think they got a few more now. And then you have 4 shifts. So that's a lot of battalions or a lot of district chiefs. So we had them all show up one day, listen to Matakowski, and he did his presentation for, I think it was 2 days or 2.5 days, and we were committed to that. So we did the blue car. So we got better at strategic level and decision making. We did the fire ground survival, which is better as 75% of that we said is to stay out of trouble, and then 25% is to get out of trouble. But I wanted them to focus on staying out of trouble, the front end of that, and then we did the fire science and got a better understanding of how buildings burn and what happens in the fire ground, what happens with ventilation, wind-driven fires. We had that. That was a big that probably a causal factor in the Southwest Freeway fire where we lost 4 people, 5 including Bill Dowling a few years later. So yeah, we were committed. So I would say that if you just look at your organization to prevent it, we're focus on at least those 3 areas, and then you may want to add more. But that's the 3 areas we want to focus on. Too many fire departments sit around. When I got to Houston, I went to and they're all good guys. I mean, really, I didn't have anybody disrespect me when I was in Houston. But I went to the first couple weeks of meetings with the command team. And I told him, I said, you guys, this is like being at a movie theater, and our chairs are not facing the screen. We're facing sideways at the wall. And the wall is the city and all the bullshit that comes from that, and personnel directives and all this. We're going to try to spin our chairs around and focus on the screen, which is our people doing the job. And we got some really good command officers in there, and we were able to do that. And they may have been doing that more in the field, but it wasn't. Can you imagine getting that many people all on the same page? But they were committed. I'll tell you what, they were. One thing about the Houston Fire Department, they rally together and support change. They did that when they lost a Yankee early on, even before I got there, when they got their 4-person staffing, they came together as an organization. So I would say come together before you have the event. And what did Bruno used to say about the way you treat each other after an event?
If you want to know what's going to happen 2 weeks after something shitty happens to your fire department, you got to go back and see what you were doing 2 weeks before.
So that's, you really need to be a little bit proactive, and I don't think we do that well in the fire service.
Well, and thankfully I've never been through it myself, but they say that if you have one of these events and there's fissures in your fire department, it's just going to start to crack. I mean, it's going to come apart if you're not on the same page before.
Yeah, they came on the same page in Houston. It was so devastating because I've seen that, and I've heard that one shift will blame another shift, and if I was there, that never would have happened. But the crew that it happened to, that was the crew. If you had a fire, that's the companies you would want, and that's the incident commander you would want on this fire. He was the guy, good old country guy that just knew how to run a fire, never got too excited. So you couldn't have had better players. So when this happened, it wasn't, oh, yeah, look what those knuckleheads did. It was, oh my God, it happened to any of us now. So we came together. But I've seen organizations and heard of organizations coming completely apart after a tragedy. And sometimes it's because the fire chief doesn't acknowledge it. Everybody did, we're okay. Let's get some new piece of equipment.
I would do the same thing today if we had that fire. That's the one that drives me crazy is when they make that statement. It's like, well, I know what they're trying not to disrespect the people who gave their lives at the fire, right. But at the same time, if you were that person's family, you'd want to hear, yeah, I'm going to do something different. I'm not going to put people through this again.
Well, I think Bruno said that when we lost Brett Tarver. Somebody asked him, what would you do different? He said, I'd do everything different to keep from losing a firefighter. They go, what? He goes, everything. I'll do everything different. What do I need to do different? We're going to do something different. But people say, oh, yeah, we'd do it that way again. Every line of duty death, you can look back and say, okay, that we need to change that. So,
you guys doing okay?
Mm-hmm. Okay. My feet are killing me.
Oh, We'll get Kyle in here to massage him for you.
Oh, that guy's so nice. He's pretty.
I wanted you guys to kind of give us the annotated history of when you were shift commanders, because to me, the halcyon days of the Phoenix Fire Department from an outsider was when we used to come here to do command training with the Phoenix Fire Department when you did the symposiums and we got to see. So how did all that come together with you guys working as shift commanders and then teaching command training for the Phoenix Fire Department?
That was one of the things that came out of the Southwest Supermarket fire. So, like Terry said earlier, when that first happened, we thought, okay, this is a rapid intervention thing. We need to fix that. That was a failure here. This didn't work. This didn't work. So, and really, there was a lot more smaller things that I think led to what happened. So, when both of us got hired, there was a shift commander system in Phoenix. So you had one deputy chief for each shift that worked a 24-hour shift. So they were the ranking person. Well, what happened is in the 80s, as the city grew and got bigger and bigger, you see, we used to send everybody to the training academy, all the companies. So 40 stations used the training academy. Well, the city's over 500 square miles. We start our shift at 8. So you're not going to be on the truck coming to the academy until 8 o'clock. Well, if you're in North Phoenix, it's going to take you an hour and a half to get there. So it was becoming hugely disruptive to train people. And at the same time, we were coming out of our union had made some changes. The city had just gone to a district system, so there's a lot of politics going on too. So the decision was made that we were going to go to a district system, and we went with staff deputies. So what that essentially did is when I was a battalion chief, I had a deputy chief who worked a 40-hour week essentially. And then they would take turns pulling the duty where they would be the senior advisor for the command van. So they all had Murphy beds in their office and nobody could see their calendars but them. So you know you've got the gig when your secretary can't see your calendar. So anyway, what would happen is if they had a tactical question, they would just come in and ask whoever the BC was. Well, we're running fires one night. Terry show up with the command van. We're doing our thing. My boss comes in and sits down. The only thing he ever cared about, do you have a PAR? That was their deal. Do you have a PAR? Every one of these staff deputies. Yeah, you learn. Yeah, we have a PAR before they even ask it. Well, what that did is I really didn't have a boss then as a BC. I mean, if I needed something, I knew who my boss was, and we got along, and that all worked. But he really wasn't there to be my boss, especially for being a tactical person. So what that did is that there were 8 battalions at the time, 3 shifts. So there were essentially 24 different models that you were going to use to do structural firefighting operations, depending on your battalion and shift. So coming out of the Southwest Supermarket, said, no, we have got to see it. When we put the districts, we decentralized all task level training. So the creating the training and delivering it was battalion specific. So Battalion 4 could be doing something that was completely wrong and nobody would have known but Battalion 4. So you started making all these different fire departments with this organization of this big city that we had become. So one of the things the group sat down, it was all the ops chiefs are in the room. And I'm like, no, we've got to go back to a system where we can train ourselves and create all this content that keeps us on the same page. There was a lot of stupid task level shit that happened at Southwest Supermarkets that added to this. So anyway, that was it. So they went to shift commanders. So that was, my interview was September 11th, 2001. And so I just got out of the shower, I'm getting dressed, put my uniform on, my wife's watching the TV. She says, you need to see this. Oh my.
Is that our shift commander interview?
Yeah, it was my. So I called fire admin and I talked to I said, hey, I've got an interview today. I suppose that we're canceling this. Maybe she says, I would say so. The mayor's hiding under your father's desk right now.
But I was the same way. I was sitting on the couch putting on my really fancy shoes for our interview.
Your shiny shoes.
I was interviewing with you today.
Yeah.
And I saw that and I told my wife, I said, come look at this. Same type of thing. Okay, well, I guess I'm staying home today. No interview.
So they rescheduled them all.
So Nick will tell you the truth about. So I was a battalion chief a little bit before Nick, because that's how many years I probably have on more than. I didn't really make captain until I had 12 years on. I liked being a firefighter and a paramedic, and it was kind of fun. So about 12 years I promoted to captain. I was never an engineer, but I worked one summer in a car wash, so I feel like I'm.
Yeah, you got those skills.
Sorry, that was a joke to an engineer of mine who tried to tease me about that once. But it was interesting because when we took the shift commander, they only had an interview for shift commander. It wasn't a deputy chief interview. So Nick, we were the only. John Hinton and you and I were the only. Was it Hobel? No, Hobel was already a deputy chief.
Yeah, him and maybe Gomez.
So we were the only real shift commander, and so we had to go through a process because it's like you can't make the fire chief's son deputy chief without a process. And there was times in our department where you just interview out of interest and you get promoted to deputy chief. And I don't know if that's happening now or not. I don't know if there's a process. There may not be a process now, but we went through an actual process. Thanks, Nick. And we got it. So most people wore deputy on their shirt, which was a rank, but Nick wore shift commander. He goes, no, this is what I tested for.
No, and when they try to move me, I did not test to be a deputy chief. So you got to move me back to a battalion. Best gig I ever had was battalion chief, man. You had no responsibility and could do whatever you wanted. It was just tremendous.
So we got tasked, and I think the order, Nick was probably better with history because I've, a little older and I've worked a few more places, so it all kind of jumbles together. But so we were the shift commander. So Nick and I were teaching. Let me tell you a little bit about. So Nick and I, the way it worked in the Phoenix Fire Department is Phoenix Community College. Was a community college where everybody who wanted to promote to captain or any rank really would go to this college and take whatever class. So the big class was a tactics class. And I think Bruno was probably the first instructor of the Phoenix College tactics class. And he did it, and then he handed it down to his next guy, who was Compton, who was the operations chief, who was, he was next. And then it went down to, I think it went to Doug Tucker, who was next, and then it went to Dennis Dote, and then it went to me, something like that. There might have been some people in between there, and the way it would work is you would select your next person to do the next part. So I selected Nick to come in and take it when I moved up or when I moved out or when I got tired of it or whatever. So we started teaching together, and we kind of got a kick out the other day. There was a NIOSH report we didn't get a kick out of the NIOSH report, but in the NIOSH report, it had the decision-making model. Well, Nick and I created that when we were teaching because all the other instructors through that lineage that I just said, they would teach the 8 functions of command. So each week in a college class, they'd take a function. And then at the end, so they get through 8 weeks and then it'd be simulations. Well, when we were teaching, it's like this, I don't know if it was the first semester we taught or the second, but it's like, this is hard to teach this way. You can't teach this function. And you guys probably find that as you read the books and go through your classes. It's like, how do you want to teach this? So we came up with, what if we just taught this model? And we came up with the model. Am I saying this right? And we started teaching the model for the students, and people were getting it. And they were like, oh, that makes so much more sense.
Well, it connected everything better than it had been. So the first deal is, like Terry said, we picked it up, and that's when it was like rescue, fire control, property conservation. And in those days, you would ventilate and search ahead of the fire attack. It's just the stuff we did. So we were teaching, and it was all the students were all taking the captain's test. That's why they were in the room. And one of them asked, they said, okay, we had a fire the other night, and it was in a vacant commercial building that was boarded up and deteriorated. It's had 3 or 4 fires in it. And he says, we go in there, and we're doing like right-hand wall searches. It says, now, why do we treat that the same way as we do like an occupied nursing home? And I remember we're looking at each other thinking, that is the stupidest goddamn thing I have ever heard. And you're like, you use the same answers that they used on you. You know, these old guys. Well, it's the best chance for the customer. You know, any victims, this is, if we don't find them, they're dead. And you're
We're parents. Right?
Yeah, and you think, well, no, it doesn't make any sense. So that's where you started pulling in the critical factors and saying you're not going to do a big search and rescue operation in a chlorine warehouse that's on fire. It's just not going to happen. Now, you would hear people, well, we're just writing off the victims then. And you think, you're an idiot. You shouldn't be allowed to talk right now. You have no idea what you're saying. You've got 10 minutes of air in your bottle, and you want to search 200,000 square feet of toxic environment. So you could use that decision-making model almost like a lawyer, I guess, to say, no, this is why we're doing what we're doing. So your incident action plan had to make sense based on the conditions you were dealing with. I think that's what changed it, as they started to say, oh, okay, so what was it? 10 years later, we moved life safety below fire control. Fire control is the first tactical priority, because if you do fire control, you have done life safety and property conservation. Yeah. Ding, ding, ding. I'll go to the next round, Monty.
But it was interesting. So we were teaching this class as battalion chiefs and kind of just figuring out the class that everybody taught. And everybody who was taking the captain's test would come to our class, just like we went to the class before. But things were changing the way we were teaching. We didn't realize that we were just trying to figure out a better way to teach. It's like, this makes no sense. And answering, really trying to answer people questions, what we should have done, right? Instead of, no, you always take the first line through the front door, the back, you come from the second line comes from the other direction. It's a larger line. That was what they taught before.
First ladder goes to the roof, second ladder does forcible entry.
And it didn't work that way. It was too cookie cutter. So anyway, we started teaching together, and that's where we would, I guess Nick probably spent some time talking to his dad about how we were teaching. And
Not really.
No. Well, we started talking.
He would have stopped us.
We started kind of, I think the notoriety of the fact that him and I were teaching, because we weren't anything special as battalion chiefs, but when we started teaching, it's like, oh, this is kind of the way to do it.
Well, and see, we had worked at PFN, so we had a graphics background. I mean, in 1985, I took a Photoshop class at a Holiday Inn in Tempe from one of the guys that wrote the program. Nobody knew what it was. And we thought, well, how do we do this? And you got to go to this class. The video guy sent you. So you're sitting there and you think, oh, Jesus. So anyway, we're changing the content of the program because we have skill sets to make graphics and shit like that. So it made it better. We used to do a BCDC thing, quarterly training. I think was a joke. But anyway, we made a test up, I remember, off the tactics thing. And it was revolutionary. It was almost like a blue card deal for the time. Right. So that really kind of, we disrupted it and confused people enough that they left us in positions. And they said, you're either going to go to jail or you get promoted another time or two. We don't know which yet. Well, the guy you were talking about that wanted us thrown out of PFN, I remember he came and got me. He says, I need you to answer some questions. So I'm sitting there, and he's got his computer up, and he's, and it's got the old Windows thing with the little tubes and the little spiral graphs, all that shit goes all over the screen. And so he turns on PFN. It's on his computer. And so it's him talking. See, and what happened is he took over the whole division. So our TV show went from being a TV show to being 30 minutes of him just talking, and then our TV show. So during his piece, because it was so long, we would have fun. So we would put on like a Mexican wrestling match and do close-ups of screaming like a madman. And then as he's droning on, we would put a little bubble in the bottom of just this. And he didn't know who it was. It was all, blah, 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 blah. They just, boom, it'd be like 2 seconds. How did you get my computer and do that? I said, we didn't. Well, they didn't understand how you put program. He thought I actually broke into his computer and was spying on him. So like
now you know why I was sent there.
The technicians are coming in and saying, how did you do this? And you're like, really? Do you know what a JPEG is or an MP3 file? Uh-huh. They shake their head.
We had pagers on our hips.
Yeah, we used to have
different
pagers.
time.
Oh, it really was. Us and drug dealers, we wore pagers. I remember I was a shift commander, and that pager, they would page you for like a first alarm in the city of Mesa. And they just kept sending it and sending it. I was talking to somebody, some chief, I think it was Burdick. And I took that pager and I threw it against the wall. It just exploded. It like cut his cheek. You can do this. This is, I don't like coming to feeding stations.
Collateral damage.
Yeah. Sorry, Marco.
Yeah. So anyway, so
It's loading up on me,
so
baby.
we started. So I'm just trying to figure out how we got like to the CTC, right? So it started with us teaching together, and then I think kind of the notoriety to where we were starting to kind of manage some of the interior training pieces, right? And then I don't know how the hell we got the whole CT. It was just one day we were at the CTC.
Well, Tarver died, and that was, I was part of the recovery.
Yeah.
And we were going to start doing command training.
Consistent
it was going to be a new
training,
deal. Yeah,
department-wide.
and it was going to be a program, like EMS was. So I remember at the time, there was a different union president, and the advice from the vice president was, don't run this through anybody. Just do it. If you want to get it done, do it. Because if you ask permission, it's going to take you 5 years. They'll keep trying to derail it. So it's almost a partisan thing.
But remember, it almost got derailed by the one guy. They put a deputy chief and a union guy as a training committee that we went to one of their meetings. Mm-hmm. They tried to control us, and that we showed up at one of their meetings, and they tried to stop everything we were doing. But
well, they said we need to see your curriculum. Well, we had just finished the second edition of Fire Command. So we showed up with that whole thing, which was about 2.5 feet high, and then all the SOPs, and then we had been building sims. And we said, here it is. We'll see you when you go through it all. Well, we never went back. We
didn't go back to they kept having meetings. I think they had monthly meetings.
Yeah.
And we were the trainers, and we didn't go to the training meeting.
No, we went to none. But we told our boss, we said, we're not going to these anymore. Do you want us to train people, or do you want us to represent you at these stupid meetings?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, we're done. In fact, keep sending us to meetings, and we will go into... it will degrade the fire department further. This isn't a good idea. We promoted the wrong people.
Well, the Command Training Center really set, in motion what we're doing right now, right, with Blue Card and everything else. And at the time, there was nothing like it. It was unbelievable. Well, these are the conversations that we were having for the fire service finally.
We put together, Garrison wrote the student workbook for the second edition of Fire Command.
So let me correct. So I didn't really write it, but I took the information Bruno had and I rearranged it.
All right. So Garrison produced that. We produced the second edition, and we could not use all the content during tactics.
Yeah.
You didn't have time to.
Yeah.
And we thought there's got to be a better way. Then we go to CTC, and we're doing the same thing, essentially. And said, we're going to go through we're going to do this through the functions. That's going to be the first piece. And then we're going to break into sims. So we kind of went down that road.
But we had John Hinton there with us as we started in the CTC. And he had a educational background. He was a high school teacher before he became a firefighter. So everybody, John Brunacini was the guy that would spend hours and hours, with the simulation. People thought, why is that guy so lazy, man? He's in there sleeping the station. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. I got to get in there. I would relieve him. And they go, Nick's still sleeping. It's 10 o'clock. I said, probably because he was up writing until 3 in the morning, which is true. You guys know that about him?
No, it's good. It was a nice place to work and do what you wanted.
He's not lazy. He does it at night.
I procrastinate as well as anybody. Mm-hmm. You just have to produce it at some point.
So then we started. So then the CTC was the key to the CTC was all 3 shift commanders trying to get all battalion chiefs on the same page. That was the key. And of course, we had the support of the fire chief. And at the time, the labor group, they're all probably gone now. And we went for how many months before anybody from labor even attended the training? Because they weren't a part of it because we didn't go to the committee meetings, so they didn't come to the CTC. And hell, we liked all the people. They weren't bad people, but they weren't going to come to our place. We didn't go to their place, so they didn't come to ours. And
we would not want each other showing up to one another's trials to testify. We knew that much about each other. So, but you're very familiar with each other, and the sergeant of arms used to stop by after lunch, maybe a little toasty. It's what are you doing? Get the
Yeah, and you know what? And it was kind of interesting because the fire chief had already, even before that, I think he was doing the symposiums.
Yeah, those have been way before that.
They were so as we kind of brought the CTC into that. Then we got to kind of move out into the symposium world a little.
So you guys had the stuff going at the command training center and the symposiums, and then people would show up from everywhere.
Right.
What was the mood like about that? Did I mean, you guys probably got it, but did the firefighters from Phoenix understand, like, man, this is like the whole country's looking at this?
You know what? I'm going to jump in on I think in retrospect, if you talk to firefighters that were there then, you talk to them now, they miss it because they loved it. It was like Phoenix Fire Department was an example, and we were kind of leading the way because of Bruno. That's why, right? And so they miss those times. I think when you're in it, you don't even realize you're really in it unless you're a part of it. I think the whole organization was excited that we could put on these symposiums. Some of us, it was just a lot of work, right? But I think now, if you talk to just about anybody from that time, there's, man, I remember when Phoenix was a leader, but you don't realize how good you had it to after it's gone.
We used to do like EMS training. They just took you off shift and sent you for 3 days, and you got your EMT. If you were a paramedic, you had to go into a different room, and they did different stuff with you. So we would do company training was the other. And we would do that in the battalions at that time. Well, if you missed company training, you didn't make it up. It's just, unless it was minimum company standards, you had to do that every year. But so with command training, because it wasn't a mandatory, you didn't have to carry, there was no cert that was going to be with it. It was just a training program. So, and then you had the problem with the training committee, and they wanted, we want to approve of everything, and we don't believe in this, and, blah, blah, blah. And so anyway, so we're putting this thing on, and what it was brand new. So I remember the first class that I was involved in is all the firefighters that came in had heard about all this stuff and wanted to see how it worked, because we had never done a simulation before where you actually tore the thing apart. Up to that point, everybody looked at the same picture, sat in the same room, and did the same thing. So at the time, we thought, no, we need to, because you don't go through the same way. And bigger, you got multiple access points to it. So anyway, what ended up happening is over time, see, Abbott, he'll be in the next day or two. He was him and the secretary were the training coordinators and the administrative support piece of that. They came up with a set of numbers after like 3 years of the program, and they said it was 80% attendance. Well, back in those days, if you got 50%, you wouldn't hold makeups. So we were getting the highest voluntary compliance to come in, and that pissed off the people in the other booth, because it was like, okay, now you don't get to be pretty pigs. So that was kind of part of it then. And there was a little jihad too, because remember the old deputies were pissed off, and you took the parts of the job we love. And remember our boss, the ops chief, calling one day, and he's saying, hey, because we went from a shift commander system away from a district commander, but the district commanders never went away. They were still there. And they were still district commanders, but you thought, what are you going to do with them? The shift commanders do everything now. Like I say, we were the pretty pigs at the time. So they decided to put over half of them back out in the field as battalion chiefs. And I remember getting the phone call like on a Thursday from Cries, and he says, hey, blah, 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 blah. I said, okay. He said, you got to train them. They got to be ready to go out and be a battalion chief. I said, so we're demoting him? He says, no, they're not getting demoted. They're keeping their same pay. I said, hey, man, this is bullshit. We should have been asked if we wanted one of these jobs, Steve.
Right.
No, you guys are stuck where you're at. So he says, you got to get them trained up so they can run a fire. That's great. When do they go out? He says, Monday. I thought, like, in 2 months? He says, no, like next week, Monday. That ain't going to work. And remember, all these guys came in, and I was the one that got picked. You have to do the class with them. So I remember sitting there, and it was a whole group of them, man. They were all older, and just they were pissed. So they offload for 10 or 15 minutes, just yelling and screaming. We hate you, young guys, you know. And at the end, they're like, it's not your fault. We would have done the same thing. I'm so sorry. So you're like, and one of them finally said it. He says, you know, we're worried about this. He says, I've never been in the field in like the last 15 years. If I show up to a fire, I don't know what to do. And I said, yeah, man, it sucks. I don't know what to tell you because we got like 72 hours. You're not going to get trained up. And it got quiet. We all just kind of staring at each other. Well, there was some fits in the room. Said, all you have a fit, right? Uh-huh. Well, you can all write. You know the numbers. You only got to go to 40. That's all we got. There's 40 things. So can you track? Uh-huh. Well, you're the driver. So they switched. They didn't get to be the attendant. They became the driver. And so I remember it was like 2 years later on, they're coming back for CTC training. And you ask him, how's it going? He says, you know how much money I made last year driving him around? He says, I can run a fire now if I need to, but why would I?
You talked about that those guys had their turnout gear still in the wrappers from when they
There's
got
spiders in it. We can't put it on. There's spiders in it. Some of it was made out of Nomex still. I mean, it's like, Jesus.
And you didn't want them in turnouts.
No.
They didn't want to be in turnouts. You didn't want them in turnouts. So for us, the timing was just right because we had been in turnouts kind of all the way up through the process. So it seemed to work out really well. But the CTC, so when we first started, it was just kind of an experiment. Bruno knew exactly what he wanted, but we were trying to figure it out. And very quickly, so you probably heard the stories that we were going to do it every quarter. We were going to do a new round of CTC training. Well, we were training the entire valley, all the chief officers in the valley. And then we had the captains in the fits, and we had the captains.
Oh, we went every day. We went Monday to Friday. The first round, it was just
the way it worked is ridiculous. When I came to the fire station in the morning, I didn't go to the fire station. I would show up on C shift and I would go directly to the CTC, and I taught that whole day, and Nick would hold over and cover the calls. And we would do that for how many? A year and a half? I mean, it was like forever.
It was tremendous. We became our own union reps at the time.
It was crazy.
It was good. It was.
And you know, and we would come over and help each other train. You know, if we had a call, we'd take the call. But it was pretty crazy. It was crazy times. So we thought we were going to be, and I don't want to say the wrong number, but how many hundreds of chief officers did we train and fits every time?
700. 600 to 700.
I was thinking it was 600, but it's like
a trimester.
Even now it seems like so many. So the other cities were coming in. So right now, they like today they had a BCDC training from Phoenix, which was so you got somebody who's selected, and I don't know if they're a shift commander or a battalion chief, and they do training, and it was a Zoom training, and they'll do a session each shift. Then they'll do it a month from now. Well, we were doing it every day for everybody. But the best training was we had a little bit of a curriculum. We would cover a little bit of the decision-making model or whatever. But and then we'd have a simulation. And then the conversation after the simulation is why we had 80%, because we were talking about events that actually occurred. And, you know, John Hinton and Nick were entertaining anyway. But people, they wanted to come to hear after this. They would have to sit through the training, go through a simulation, and then the real fun began, right? And we had, hold it, before I leave there, And all those district chiefs tried to put shit on our, hey, why you have them all there? Add this. Now, you know that happens in your department.
Oh, Cantwell called. I need the first 30 minutes.
Every period that would happen. It's like, no, you can't.
Yeah.
We're not
We want to
allowing-
do uniforms. We get 80% because we don't do that. We don't believe in it. Well, we were very unkept too. I mean, yeah. So
Yeah.
we're B shifters. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was wide open.
Awesome. Great time. I mean,
Oh,
it
it's
was, I mean,
tremendous.
for us coming in and seeing what you guys had going, it was like, this is what the American Fire Service needs right now. And you guys were doing it.
Oh, it was tremendous.
You know what's interesting? It happened so fast. I didn't even know. One day I'm doing this, and the next day we're at the CTC running these.
Well, then we figured it out pretty quick. So within about a year, we had it refined. Where we went from 5. Well, actually, it was like within 6 months, because we went from 5 days a week to 3 days. So we changed the schedule and said we're only doing it Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So everybody owes 1 4-hour training session a week, for the shift commanders. Now, originally, we put it together because the plan was we were going to deliver the training to the BCs first, and then the BCs were going to deliver it to the company officers.
Yeah.
Well, about 2 weeks into that,
Trickle down economics.
yeah, that's exactly what it is we had a meeting with the staff, and they said, okay, here's what happens. A shift came in, and your 4-hour training program, they were done with it in 1 hour. Then B shift did show up, and then C shift was here, and they ran out of time halfway through. And so you start, okay, who was here? Okay, that's who the BC was, and then that BC. Okay, this is a and we knew within 2 minutes we are so fucked. Because we're going to have to be in it every time. We have to be the adult in front of this thing. And And so the first session, we were getting goofy. Insubordinate with people. So we had to change it. And that's where we did the Monday or the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And the effect was tremendous. It is doing less, but spending better time on it. And then that evolved. Because we were changing shit out of the Southwest supermarkets. And it's like, no. We're not changing the RIC thing. This is what we're going to do. So being a shift commander allowed us to take over company training. So we said, every month we're going to do a set of drills doing this. Where all you old deputies and your young captains put your shit on with your mask and you're going to do... Because that's what was it? The Lincoln fire where we almost killed 2 people at a defensive fire. So that was the CTC days. We had them all in and said, that's when we took safety over. As we said, safety can't be in a different division anymore. Yeah. If we're going to run this, you got to give us the whole deal. So, and we just kept, you want the safety division? Take it. Well, man, it was money. The safety officers loved it. They became chief's aides. I mean, it was a hug and a kiss.
What a job we had. Every conversation was about operations.
Oh, exactly.
Nobody asked us about paperwork or anything else. That got done by other people. We would just got to be the everything. And we would have so we would teach. And then every conversation we would have, we would come in on our days off and talk to each other about the class. I mean, there was a lot of energy. We had a lot of energy.
Well, so we were the senior advisors. We had the command van. We'd show up and we would, do that piece of it. That was the other deal. So these older deputies were mad because we wouldn't let them in. And we think, no, this is a command van. This isn't an RV. So, everybody was getting used to the new way we were going to do stuff.
No, we would actually, a deputy would come up to the door, and at first there was 7 of them just standing around in there. And Bruno didn't even do that. He'd show up and kind of look and say hi and walk out and left us alone. But you'd have 7 deputy chiefs standing around, asking you for pars. And so we came up with and I don't know exactly how, we said, we're going to implement every position in here. It's a position and function, just like on the fire round.
5.
Yeah. So
it's a 5. If you ain't one of the 5, you better outrank.
So I remember
everybody.
a guy that outranked me and kind of a bully and been around forever. And he opens up the door to the CV, and I'm the senior advisor. I says, "Hey, can I come in?" I said, "Yeah, if you want to be the safety officer over here, you can come in and sit there and put a headset." "Well, I don't want to do that." "And can't come in." We shut the door on him. And it's like that got around. And when we were shutting doors on people, that got around really fast.
Well, and there was 3 or 4 times a month you'd set the command van on something. And I remember about 3 or 4 years into the program is we were having a shift commander meeting with our boss, and the command van came up. And we started asking one another, "When's the last time you set the thing up?" And it had been like 2 or 3 months. And we're like, well, and we had more fires during that period of time. And what we were finding out, it was we were putting them out quicker with fewer resources. The whole thing. It was a hug and a kiss. So that was the proof of the pudding, is the actual application of the thing. So once that began happening, people could see then, and a lot of stuff, you're up there, you got your rank now, and you're okay, this, that, and the other thing, and this is the way we're going to do it. And I remember the captain sometimes thinking, okay, we'll see about this. And you would respond on something, and some knucklehead BC would do something that you said we weren't going to do anymore. And so I remember the same captain standing there thinking, all right, we're going to see what happens now. Well, you take a shift commander who quietly takes a battalion chief by their ear behind a tree. It applies to all of us.
Well, that was it, right?
Yeah. So they could see this is a real deal. It was, there was an effect to it.
So Terry, would you say you're still operationally oriented as a fire chief?
So today, I'm driving to work this morning over in Glendale, and I'm the 101. It's an outer loop freeway. And I'm about 2 miles from my office about 8 o'clock this morning, and I see a column of smoke start. And that thing just goes straight up. And it's a big column. I'm thinking, that has to be a car fire, because there was nothing. And then there was thick black smoke about as, I don't know, giant. To me, it looked giant. So I get off, I pull, that's my next exit. So I pull off, and now this thing's really rolling. I'm thinking, well, maybe it's an RV or something. It's got to be petroleum. It's like blowing. Didn't burn like a brown at any point. It went from clear to black. The sky was clear, and then black, and then rolling. So I get around the corner, and I pull up, and sure enough, there's a burn victim over here on the right, some large guy who's wearing his underwear, burn all the way down. You can see he ended up having 40% of his body with 3rd-degree burns. And he's got a little girl with him, and she wasn't burned, but she was in the house. So I pull up in my car, and I look at this, and it's a house with a working, this sucker is blowing. And I went on the scene. I said, and I looked at my radio. Who am I? Oh, I'm car 151. That's who I am. Car 151 to alarm. Go ahead, car 151. I'm on the scene of a medium-sized house with obvious working fire. I'll go ahead and take command. She says, "Yeah, would you do that on Fire Channel 6?"
Yeah, go to D-Deck.
I was on the wrong deck. I was on Channel 6. Somehow my radio got probably when I maybe reaching for a hamburger or something at lunch. I knocked it over to the wrong deck. So I looked up, and an engine company was laying in, or actually pulling in. They didn't lay a line from another city, and he's giving his on-scene report on the right channel. And I thought, thank God. So I don't know if that answers your question. So it's all in my head, But it's kind of like I teach a class right now with Chris Stewart at Paradise Valley Community College. And he asked me to teach. He's been asking me forever. Finally, I said, "God, I'll do it. Just leave me alone." So I started teaching command strategies for major emergencies. And I said, man, I am not very good at teaching. And he said to me, he goes, Terry, it is a perishable skill that you got to keep up. And I'm thinking, that's a nice way to agree with me that I suck. So I honestly, I think that it is a perishable skill. I think we could all, teach it eventually, or, I could get back in. But if you're not out there doing it, and I felt like I could do it as well as anybody, I think if you don't do it for a long time, you kind of lose a little bit. Would you say so? You hate to say that, but it's the same way with really anything.
I haven't sat in front of a burning building for 12 years.
Yeah. So they went and they took care of the fire this morning, and I went over and held the little girl. It was like, well, let me do something. I'm in my costume, with the big gold badge. So I held her and waited for that. But yeah, I think I could teach it and talk about it. You could probably get through a fire with it. I thought I was kind of going through the decision making model there, but I sure was glad when I saw that engine company and the captain on the scene.
Well, if you would have had a good aid or fit or whatever you call them, you would have been money because they tell you what to say.
Yeah, it's not my fault. He would have put me. They would have put me on the right channel.
Yeah, he would have put you on the right deck.
So yeah, I think you guys. So what you guys are doing by teaching all this. So now you do it and you teach it, and I think that's the real skill. I think that's what Hinton was really good at. He could teach, he could hit the bullet point and entertain you, and so could Nick. But we did at the time with the CTC. Think about it. We were doing it, we were teaching it. All we did was talk about it, and then we'd start again, and then we just did over and over again. So
yeah, it was about 5 years.
That was our whole existence, our whole life. And Bruno saved us. The fire chief saved us from really worrying about anything else. I mean, that was our job. And then he made. Then they made me the super deputy when Steve Christ was our boss, and he had to do a bunch of other stuff. And so he needed help managing the three of us. So he called me in and he goes, hey, Terry, fire chief wants you to come in and work staff. And I said, really, what am I going to do? He goes, you're going to manage the shift commanders. I said, I'm getting a promotion? No. So let me get this straight.
Yeah.
I was supposed to manage John Hinton and Nick, and I'm not getting a promotion. I'm coming in on staff. Boy, that's a great deal. When do I start? So we tried to find a fourth guy. We did. Yeah, the fourth musketeer.
Who was the
Cockburner.
Oh, is that who it was?
Well, we thought it was going to be Pete, but it was there. We went through. I think Cockburner was the closest to being the fourth there for a while. Pete,
I think he was up next.
Yeah, he was up next, and he had paid attention to what we were doing. Pete Hobel was probably could have been the big fourth, but he was busy running the.
He went back to A shift.
Yeah, and they were running the staffing for the city. So we had a shift commander north that was the three of us, and all we did was training, and the shift commander south, and all they did was staffing, and we would all go on calls. But that was their primary. You couldn't do both. So I think he got
too
up.
busy.
And I don't know if Cockburner was south and then came north or whatever. But
I think he came north because before my dad retired, I went to staff. Okay. I became the fourth deputy, and we had started to revise the procedures.
Yeah.
So I remember we were starting to incorporate on deck into it and kind of tweaking that. And then he retired, I don't know, 2 months into that, and then it was it was a new day.
Yeah,
then Terry became the fire marshal or something crazy like that, right?
Well, we all got sent. They treated us like radiation. Yeah, keep them away from
my very first day with the new fire chief is, hey Terry, you're going to be thanks for everything you're doing. I was in my super deputy office. That's what they used to call me because I managed these. I tried to get him. it was bad, but you're gonna be the fire marshal. I said, when? He goes, starting next Tuesday. And I said, wow, okay, thanks for that. I said to him, hey, I never disrespected the last fire chief, and I'm not going to disrespect you, but don't call me a fire marshal because I don't know anything about fire marshal. I'll go over and manage fire prevention. Sure enough, I go to lunch that day and I come back and there's a plastic junior fire marshal helmet on my desk. That's what you do as firefighter. I took it as a loving moment.
So while we have Terry here, I wanted to just talk about a couple other things. Oh God.
No.
Oh no. Oh no, not this. Longevity as a fire chief.
Yeah.
So you've been doing it for a while now. What would you say for any fire chiefs, potential fire chiefs out there listening? What is the key to longevity as a fire chief?
I'm going to lean forward. So, first of all, we got to tell people the true story. So I was in Oceanside for about 2.5 years, maybe almost 3. And then I left there as the fire chief, and I was 49 years old. And then I came back here and I was actually going to retire. And Tom Healy, a great fire chief in Daisy Mountain, was dying. He didn't know he was dying. He was getting cancer treatment. He called me up and said, "Hey, can you be the interim chief while I get my chemo and then I'll come back?" And I never wanted to be the fire chief at Daisy Mountain. The fire district thing didn't seem really, I wanted more of a city job. So while I was there, I applied for Houston. I went to Houston and got that job, and I was there for 5 years. And in Houston, when you get a new mayor, thank you. You get a new mayor, you get a new police chief, fire chief, city attorney, water director, and all that. And then while I was there, and I think I would have stayed there a few more years, but Glendale opened up, and that's where I was born and raised. So I came back to Glendale. So longevity as a fire chief, not so much longevity in a position. I tell people, I can't hold a job, can't keep a job.
Yeah, but Houston, they didn't. The first time you thought you were going to leave, they wanted to keep you.
Yeah,
they didn't want you to go, and then you're doing great here.
I made great friends in Houston. I still talk to them. I talked to Jackie Dowling on the phone the other day, Captain Iron Bill. So I still connected. My ops chief at the time, Richard Mann, is the fire chief of College Station. I talked to him all the time. Houston was a great city and great firefighters. Honestly, I would still be there. Thank God I'm not, because that mayor and I wouldn't have a lot in common. But so you asked about longevity. So don't do what I did in Oceanside, which is tell your city manager to fuck off. That's not a good deal. When he told me that I was going to make a 2-person engine company, and in California, Southern California, they have 3-person companies. He didn't like the fire department, and he hired me. But he said, "Yeah, you're going to make a 3-person engine company." I said, "No, I'm not." And he goes, "Yeah, you are." And I said, "No, I'm not." He said, "I'm the city manager. You're going to do it." I said, "I'm the fire chief. I'm not." "Yeah, you're going to do it, and you're going to do it right away." I said, "No, if you want to be the fire chief, I got a white fucking helmet in my office. Go put it on." And so that started. Once you still fuck out, they just keep getting louder. So that meeting, and I'd already known that I had 2.5 years and I could buy my pension out with my military time. So I said, "Well, hey, you can get rid of me for a cost." And he said, "What is it?" And I told him, and he said, "I'll be right back." He went down to the city attorney's office, come back, and he said, "When you leaving?" I said, "I didn't ask for enough." But so then I had to go. Seriously, that day I walked back across the street to some of the guys that I just absolutely adore. Mike Mathai and the guys across the street, and Joe Ward and those guys. I had to tell them, "Hey guys, I just really screwed up. I threw down a gauntlet, and he picked it up and slapped me with it." But it was time to leave Oceanside. So the first thing to longevity is don't tell your bosses to fuck off, even though you think it, unless you really are ready to just go on and do something else. But the problem was I left those guys there. And I felt like I really, even to this day, when I see them, it's like, "Sorry, I left." And that was how many years ago? And they're like, "No, you're okay, Chief. No, sorry, I left." So don't ever, be sure which battle you pick, because somebody's going to challenge you and you're going to have to really go all the way. I think that was a battle I was willing to, I would do it again today. But I probably could have used a different technique and a little bit more. I probably could have moved it out further and not done the 3-person and got the data and the reasons why and all that. And that's what I would do today is, I would use some sort of process to convince that person that that's not the way to go before I would tell them, "Screw you, I'm not doing it."
So like using science.
Yeah, science and data, and Dana Matakowski. Yeah, right. So, and what 3 persons do. And so right now I got a city manager who wanted us to go to 3 person when I first got to Glendale from 4. And I pulled out all the data and showed him, the NFPA documents and the NIT studies and everything. The breakdown of the work and everything. And he couldn't support that. It's like, so I wasn't going to tell him, screw you, but I was going to, somehow that was going to get information out that we're lowering the level of service. That would have been a technique to use. So, don't do that. Be careful. And it was bad because once again, they got a guy in and the guy made a 2-person engine company, the guy after me. So I wasn't able to prevent that. Once I left. So don't get yourself, as they say in Texas, don't get wound up on a rut, because that's what happens. You just grind yourself down. But I put myself in a position. So once you say, fuck you, it pretty much game on. So I wouldn't do that again. And then, I go to Houston, and Houston, they only had one other outside, the 3rd largest fire department in the country. And I'm the outside guy, and they had so they had their last outside guy in the 80s, and he lasted 60 days. So when I arrive in Houston, they say, "What's your goal, Chief?" And I'd say 61 days. So I was there over 5 years, and I would have stayed there, and I made great friends. But in Houston was exactly where I needed to be, because we were losing firefighters, and I got to work on operations issues. And I worked for a mayor, but she, they wouldn't, a lot of the firefighters wouldn't know it, but she didn't even. Chief, she goes, "If you break it, you fix it." I met her every month for about 5 minutes. And she go, "What do you got?" And I learned early on, I got nothing. I'm good. I wouldn't ask her for anything, and she would let me run the fire department. I actually liked her. Firefighters didn't like her, but she didn't really get in our business too much like she could have, like the mayor they have now. Jeepers creepers. So there, longevity there is just stay really connected to your people. And like I said, make sure all the chairs are focused on the firefighter work you do. I told one city manager, I said, if you don't appreciate firefighters, it's hard to believe, but do you appreciate the work that they do? Do you appreciate the way the customers are served and the fact that how can you appreciate the work without appreciating the workers? So that's kind of the way I do it now, instead of, "Oh, you hate firefighters, you rat bastard." That was my B shift side. It felt good, but and then what I say is every decision I make, and I truly mean this in every city I've been, is every decision I make is every dime I spend, every minute I spend should support firefighter safety and customer service. And don't get caught up in all this other crap, because you'll get pulled into stuff. They say you're a politician as a fire chief. Well, you're a politician just in life, right? When you're sitting across the table with somebody that disagrees with you about something, that's kind of politics, where you're not really telling them what you completely feel, but you're not agreeing with them either. That's kind of the politics of a fire chief. So don't get caught up with a lot of the BS. Yeah, so don't get caught up in that, and just make decisions. So the other thing, I was lucky early on. So when I went to the Oceanside, it was all about tactics, because they really didn't have an incident command process there. And I remember the day that I got to take the Suburban and open it up, where this guy built this beautiful cabinet to stand behind, and actually throw it into the trash, because it's like, no. Well, Chief, we're not going to be able to get him to stay in the Suburban because he built this cabin. And I said, okay, drive that over to the academy. Let's pull that out. We pulled it out and threw this walnut-looking thing into the trash and said, you're going to sit there and command. So that was kind of fun. And so I guess just focus on operations and focus on supporting your people. And then I stole Bruno's stuff, and I always, it was be safe, be nice, and be accountable. And that's been my kind of the principles. Be safe. So what do you do to be safe? All those things we talk about. Be nice, all that stuff that Bruno brought us. In fact, both of those are stole by him. And then the last was be accountable. And Bruno didn't like the word accountability too much. I told him that once, and he kind of did that deal where, you know how he does that, where he kind of, I said, well, every time I've arrived as the fire chief, there's always people saying, hey, are you going to hold these guys accountable? And then there's another group that says, thank God, somebody to hold them accountable. So everybody likes that accountability until it's turned on them. So I always like to say, nah. In Houston, it was so big. I know I'm all over the place, but I'm trying to give you what I got, is that I knew we were going to create change in the Houston Fire Department. So the first thing I did is we trained everybody on what we call the accountability model, but it's a change model. And said, here's how we're going to. So the first thing we trained is, here's how we're going to change. We're going to set expectations, train to the expectations, monitor performance, and then hold people accountable. But first, we're going to set expectations. So the very first language that I used there was the accountability model, and I got to teach share that with all the chief officers. And it was simple, because it's like, the reason you need to go through that is because you got to set expectations, because what does people say? People say, well, they never told me. And then train them. What do people say? Well, they never trained me. And then the third piece is monitor performance. Well, I've been doing it this way and nobody's told me anything. And then you hold them accountable. So you kind of eliminate the excuses. And that was the best thing. I didn't even realize how well that was working in Houston. But I would have firefighters come up to me about 6 months later and say, hey, Chief, this guy did this. And I go, yeah. And he goes, but I told him I set expectations with him, Chief. So they were using the language back on you. That's pretty cool when that happens. So I think, just don't take anything too personal. Don't do what Nick advised us not to do, is stay away from office furniture. The police chief in Houston, a really nice man when I was there. This large, tough, grew up in the streets of Houston cop, African-American guy. And he was just shredded at about 6'6" and 225 pounds, and nicest guy on the planet. And he got an office chair. He got this really nice office chair. About a month later, we wanted to buy chairs for the dispatch center. And you know how much a dispatch center chair is. They're like thousands and thousands of dollars. So a reporter came in and did a research project on all the chairs that the city had purchased, believe it or not. And they found out that the police chief had spent $1,000 or whatever it was on his office chair. So he got interviewed on that, and that could have ended up really bad for him, Nick. But I remember the interview. He's just such a great guy. But the reporter says, asking a question, so I heard you about this, $1,000 chair. Yeah, I did. Well, why did you buy that? Because I like comfortable chairs. And I said, my chair a lot. He goes, well, we'd like to see your chair. Can we see your chair? No, you can't see my chair. It's my chair. And the interview stopped. He got away with that. But that's a one-in-a-lifetime deal, because that could have went really bad for him. But anything like that, just silly stuff that you purchase things on. Just, I was telling our guys the other day, we're going through a budget process. And we don't ask for better chairs, better bed mattresses, bigger TVs. Union buys those anyway, or bigger kitchen chairs or couches. We ask for tick cameras, hoses, nozzles, turnouts. That's what we ask for in the fire service, and city managers and budget directors keep beating us up. Why you guys keep asking for shit? Because we want to do our job. Why do you need 2 paramedics on a engine? That's what I'm going through right now. Why do you need 2 paramedics? Because I want the customers to survive. Mm-hmm. So anyway, if you just focus on that, and I tell every city manager, I would focus on firefighter safety and customer service. That's my decision. So if you bump up against that, like 4-person staffing or 2 paramedics, then you and I are going to bump up against each other. But I'll do it in a more respectful way, right?
It's pretty simple, though, isn't it? I mean, what you're describing,
yeah,
and it's amazing how complicated people can make the job.
It's not. Being a fire chief's pretty easy, because everybody else is doing the work.
Yeah,
they really are. Get along with labor, because they're in the same business. If they support you're both there to support the firefighters. Why would you argue with people who are supporting your workforce? I care as much about the workforce as the labor president. So
You got to communicate,
Yeah.
and let people know that, and not necessarily visible all the time, but they know you're there. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, you know that old saying. They when I got to Houston, first of all, I had a wonderful saying when I got to Houston. It was, "I'm not from Houston or not from Texas, but I got here as fast as I could." They like that. But the other one is you people don't care what you know till they know you care. It sounds goofy, but it really does. I had and I'm going to brag right here. It's the only time that I'm going to really brag about something. So when Captain Bill Dowling died, the Southwest freeway fire that killed our 4 firefighters immediately and cost some other guys their career. And then Captain Bill Dowling, the toughest guy on the planet, lost his legs. They pulled him out of the fire, and he lived for a few years, and his wife Jackie took wonderful care of him. When he finally died, I shouldn't say finally, when he died, that I got a call from Richard Mann, who was the ops chief there, and he goes, "Hey, what are you doing on this date?" And I go, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "The crew of his company wants you to come back and speak on behalf of the firefighters." I said, "What?" He goes, at the funeral for Bill Dowling, they want you to come back and talk on behalf of the firefighters. It's like, are you shitting me? There's never a bigger compliment in my entire life. So I think that they knew that I cared about all of them because we went through that entire event together. But can you imagine all the Houston firefighters, the outside chief, who is a rat bastard to many, they asked me to come back and talk on behalf. And it was probably the one time in my life where I was more nervous speaking in public. And as I'm writing what I was going to say, and man, I was saying prayers, let me get this right. And my wife was helping me. And but that to me was like, that was the biggest moment of my life. So show people you care. Even if you got to make, Bruno used to say, don't yell down, yell up. I yelled up and added an FU to it, and what cost me my job. But yell up, don't yell down, right? You ever yell at a kid, at one of your kids, and then go, "Man, I feel like shit."
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's the way you should feel as a fire chief. You should probably, or as anybody within the fire service, you should probably feel like that. If you don't feel like that after getting on a firefighter's ass, you probably, like Nick said, he took the guy behind the tree. And he was very specific on that incident where I saw him do something knucklehead that I told him not to do. Nick, who's as big in life as Nick is, took him behind the tree and said, "Hey, knock it off," right? So I think that's a big deal. That's a long answer to that question.
That's a great answer.
I hope you don't ask me anymore. I hate to talk about myself like that, but that was a big moment for me. My wife went back with me, and
Well, I'm glad you talked about yourself because, I mean, for me, since I first saw you speak in like 2005 and followed your career, and now we write an article together, and you're always the wiser of the two.
I don't believe that.
I've just really admired you, and you come out with love, and you love your people, you love the business, and
I enjoy writing that. I'm going to break in because you're getting there, but I enjoy writing that article with you. You have a very interesting perspective, and we're always on the same page, coming at it from different sides of the same topic, but we get right there and we end up in the same place. And I think that's pretty awesome. That's where I know I'm on track. I know I'm on track when I end up kind of close to where you are, because I think you're pretty sharp, and I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you, man. Appreciate you talking to us today.
Are you kidding? Thanks for inviting me over. Nick said I was going to have cocktails, but I'm sitting here with no drinks. He said there'd be dancing girls. I don't hear no music.
Let's go pick out office furniture. And that's a wrap of this edition of B Shifter. We want to thank Terry Garrison and, of course, Nick Brunacini for joining us on this episode. If you'd like to reach out to either of them, their contact information is in the show notes. If you have any suggestions for us here at the B Shifter Podcast, please let us know, too. You can reach me, John Vance, at bshifter.com. Until next time, thanks for listening. Please be safe.